So part of being a Naiji means that you will experience the state known as frenzy. The one that's most often sort of associated is the warp frenzy, which actually comes from V. However, the sort of fanatical nature that has been mentioned in other sections of this book it sort of shows that that nature really spills over into all the life of the Naiji. So there actually are at least 4 different distinct frenzies dealing with the 4 conscious powers. So we'll start with V, which is the warp frenzy. This is basically when the Naiji's vision or simulator or spirit forms are screaming in a spiritual volume level for them to do something, and they must make their body do it. So they can literally warp their body into doing things that maybe it can't or shouldn't even do temporarily, defying the laws of nature. Not really, but seeming to. This is very, very dramatic and tends to have a very overt display that galvanizes and unnerves the environment. Okay. So this is actually necessary for Naiji to do a lot of their key peak pathway feats. So it's not something to be avoided. It's just like most of the Naiji stuff. It's something that must be learned about how to do it properly, because it's just such an extreme ability. When in the warp frenzy state, there is almost an oblivious nature to fear, pain, fatigue, anything of that nature. Simply whatever it takes to get the job done, and the body will push itself to its limits until it simply can't anymore. But it will never know defeat. It will simply just warp spasm until it gets what it's supposed to get, or blackness, and will wake up in another life. The frenzies, however, have some very different states based on the power associated. So when the tremendous nervous energy comes over in Naiji, that's what creates the warp frenzy. That HSP and warp frenzy are actually very much related. So the nervous energy animates the body. If nothing can be done with this, and it needs to be sort of suppressed, or even maybe channeled in a very, very specific way, Naiji can go what's called into a trance frenzy. And this has a lot to do with Zai. The trance frenzy is when the Zai has taken over and is dealing with the warp frenzy or the nervousness energy by funneling it into a very specific rhythm. So you'll see this, for example, in MMA fighters, in violinists, painters, pianists, all kinds of things where there needs to be a metronome-like action taken, and the nervous energy can be channeled into that metronome-like activity. Naiji, for example, are very, very good at mantras, things of that nature, where you go into a state where you're repeating something over and over and get sort of like self-hypnotized. So the trance frenzy has to do a lot with self-hypnosis and all things you would kind of associate with that. This looks very, very different often than the warp frenzy, although the two can work together and go in and out. But often people, when they see one of these, they often don't understand the two are linked. For example, in the Zai trance frenzy, the warp frenzy energy is humming underneath the surface. And in the warp frenzy state, there is an ability to steer. You can actually do curves and pause using the Zai. But when the frenzy is paused, it actually has an extremely intense paused quality. So it goes from being intensely overt and animating the body in a kinetic way to like absolute supreme attention given to being almost statue-like, or where the movements are like a robot was making them. And all the nervous energy is channeled into that. So those two can actually go in and out. Does that make sense? Okay. Now the G, this is what I call the role frenzy, R-O-L-E, which is the nervous energy can actually be put into a role in which there is speech and acting out a character. Normally with V in the warp frenzy, one of the main things you notice is Naiji want to speak with their hands, with their fists, with their tongues, with their heads, with sharp objects, heavy objects, automobiles, things of this nature. But there's not much talking going on. So in the G frenzy is you can get worked up and then transfer it into a role that actually is more sophisticated. Now this takes more doing, because it can actually feel like you're being possessed. Because with the warp frenzy, it feels like your body is moving on its own. That's a key part of the warp frenzy. It just knows what it needs to do to get the win, and there's no hesitation and there's no fear. With the trance frenzy, there is you sort of get possessed by the rhythmic movement that you've chosen to go into a trance on. And so that movement, or that piano piece, or whatever, that martial art move you're doing, sort of possesses you. So that can be kind of a cool possession. So the frenzies have a lot to do with Naiji being self-possessed, ha ha ha. Okay, so these are various 4 ways it comes out. In the Ji way, there is like taking all that nervous energy and putting it into a form that can hold it. So, for example, some Naiji actors may say something like, the character allows me to not be nervous. They'd be nervous on camera, except they put all their energy into being that character, and then, this is key to all the frenzies, the nervousness goes away. So you can warp spasm, you can go into a trance hypnosis style, or you can just start doing a character. And the character will sort of make the nervous energy not feel nervous. It'll give it a purpose to animate this sort of very complex mazout. So Naiji, as mentioned in the mazout section, can really get head and spirit forms and can have rather a large pantheon of mazouts. So or any one of the characters in their pantheon of Ji mazouts, they're able to go very deep with it. So the more nervous they can get deeper into method acting. It's a way of retreating, ironically. So the warp frenzy, you get rid of the nervousness by smashing the thing making you nervous. With the trance frenzy, you get rid of the nervousness by actually doing whatever it is the fuck you're supposed to do under that emergency situation. You know, like a firefighter, I'm sure you have those. When shit gets gnarly, just do this. That's what you do when the shit goes bad. That's trance frenzy, and Naiji are very good at that. The role frenzy is, oh shit, such and such is coming up and they want to talk to me, and like, I don't want to talk to them, I'm really, really nervous. What do? You make up a character. You just make a character up and you start being like, hey, I was looking at such and such, and you start talking about some book you're into. You're not even into that fucking book, but it's something to talk about. Anything to hide the awkwardness. So there you can kind of frenzy into that character. And Naiji use this in method acting. They also use it on stage, for example, in music concerts, also comedy. They use it constantly, this jumping into a character in order to not be there anymore. Most Naiji stand-up comedians use this technique. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Naiji stand-up comedian who does not actually use this kind of role or character frenzy. Finally, the most impressive of all the frenzies, and one that actually most people miss. They tend to notice the ones that are V and G because they're fairly obvious. Zai, sometimes some people miss that like natural law humming sound underneath the hood. Nijai don't tend to miss that, but other humans do. They don't notice that person humming like a crazy person. But the deep frenzy is one that a lot of people miss. Even, say, Nijai, even the Naiji themselves, they don't know they're doing it. It's that deep, hence the name, which is the nervous energy builds up so much that the other 3 methods, attacking it, going into a tactical sequence, or enacting a super character, none of it works. So you bury it. You stuff it, and what happens is the warp frenzy still takes place, but in outer space. It takes place underwater, deep, deep in the far regions of Nai, out in the middle of the unknown. But that doesn't mean it's not actually happening. Naiji can sometimes feel this feeling in the back of their head, like this deep churning, like their spirit forms or their simulator has gotten deeply upset about something they can't do anything about. It often happened early in their childhood, and like their spirits are like, okay, I don't know when, but someday we're taking care of that. And it just starts working on that problem, fanatic style in the psyche. And this is something that often, when you think frenzy, you often think fast, but actually the trance frenzy and the deep frenzy could actually have almost a serene or calm quality. Definitely trance frenzy does sometimes, but the deep frenzy has a slow, deep, implacable quality. Like an engine that will never, ever, ever run out of fuel. Does that make sense? So like an engine that like gets angry and stronger each day, like an engine that gets pissed off and is lifting weights. So that's the deep frenzy, and most Naiji have a deep frenzy in them that is often associated frequently with some of the kensei activities they do, or other things that become very important for them to do as far as monologuing or creating media outlets, is that they need to fix that. Like natural law, Nai was deeply and utterly offended, but they were powerless to do anything about it. So basically, in the back lab of your unconscious, it's working on that problem, and someday it's going to get the answers, and then showtime. Even the Naiji's like, where's this coming from? And the Nai's like, I told you when you're 4 years old we were going to do something about this. It just took me a while to get the answer. And there you go. Some more details. There is degrees of all these frenzies. So those are 4 different varieties. There's also degrees. Naiji are prone to frenzy, hence the section on their moodiness and extreme volatility, is even in Mazout form, Naiji are prone to be extreme in how they feel about things. So most Naiji won't even know this when they're teaching someone something, and when it goes out of line, sometimes they're not even actually in the position of teaching someone. It just happens in the environment around them, and they just decide to play the role of the teacher. And the other people are not getting it, due to usually maybe some sort of flaw in their character. There's a very shortness of temper on that. It doesn't even have to be overt. It can be a very stony face, calm disapproval. But still, it's an immediate and severe reaction to an infraction of natural law. Someone has, done an offense against natural law, and we're not pleased with this. So there's like Sirio Florel, perfect example. Not like this, like this. And then if someone maybe doesn't get it right, not like that, like this, not like that, like this, not like that, like this, not like that, like this. And this is actually fairly calm for a Naiji. That's nothing. That's like barely the sea foam on a tsunami. But right there you're actually seeing sort of frenzying come on, and it tends to be associated with when a Naiji thinks they actually know what's going on and what should be done in the environment. It's difficult because the spirits want you to do it. So you're kind of dealing with, when you see the infraction, spirits yelling at you, fix that. Deal with that situation. And so Naiji have to use Mazouts a great deal to hide how intensely they find the infractions of natural law and the absurdities of people's misunderstandings of it. Next, Daryu. This is the one that people pretty much are used to, which is that Naiji under stress will frenzy on you. This is what people often think of as standard frenzies for all those, but actually it really falls into stress/survival. Because there's other frenzies that are actually even cooler, which would be the other. The other actually causes you to frenzy too, because really frenzy for Naiji is just part of the keening process, which means anytime they're getting worked up properly in their peak pathway or spirit forming, they're going to actually frenzy. So that means that when they're with their other, which is actually a much more productive, energetic activity, there is going to be frenzying, and that frenzy is actually much more powerful and effective than the frenzies of the Daryu or of the Mazout, because the Daryu is mainly doing frenzy to survive. That's its psychology. The psychology of the Mazout is basically to make things as smooth as possible. That, not really to get your agenda across, but make things as cool as they can be. The other, now we're talking about what you're built to do. That's important. And then finally your Fumasta, that's like visionaries. So the other is kind of like productive, like what you're built to do, / artistic frenzies. And the Fumasta is sort of like visionary / spiritual, because at that point it usually means that the Naiji is putting out into the world something that is beyond even just the awesome beauty of their other, which if you actually were to be bad towards that, for sure they're going to frenzy on you. So now it's going to be worse than that, which is that it's beyond art, it's truth. And someone is basically saying truth isn't truth. there's no give on that. And if anyone gives pushback, if you say truth is truth and they say no, and you say yes and they say no again, ba-boom! Ba-ba-boom! They get a Fumasta style. So basically, Naiji are built to be, you know, rather intense individuals, so they have to learn how to deal with that. But starting with the Mazu will frenzy on you, Daryu will frenzy on you, Other will frenzy on you, Fumasta will frenzy on you. So the main thing is get really good at it.